In the hospital where my mother was later recovered, some doctors would talk with each other about the surprising factor of my mother waking up from the internal slumber. Seemingly, it was basically an impossible case to even solve, since they have not found any medicine to be even possible of curing it. So they were practically surprised and decided to maybe run some tests on her to make sure that she's fully recovered, since they weren't sure if that will actually work. Eventually, one of the coworkers of the manager of the hospital would eventually tell him about me actually being her son and being the new 10th S rank. Of course, after the boss of the hospital instantly hears this, instantly begins to sweat and eventually looks aside and tells his colleague that then they shouldn't hold any of their healthy patients against their will. And because he's most likely scared of going against an S rank, since he knows that S ranks are real powerhouses that should not be underestimated nor messed with, since it can cause a lot of damage, not only just to a people but also to some financial stuff as well. So he decides to basically be safe than sorry, with his colleague also nodding in agreement. While back in our room, Jill will be crying as she will hug our mother, seemingly happy to have her waking up after so long, when of course our mother hugging her back into her that she is regrown up. I'll then look at the two of them with a calm and gentle smile. It's been so long since my family has been whole. Well, at least as whole as it can be. Honestly, this reminds me of my family from the past. Man, I really do miss my past life from time to time. Even though I was basically a normal person back then, it was still pretty enjoyable. I had my moments with my family. But I cannot change that. I'm now in this world, and this is my new home. And I must accept it. I've accepted it a long time ago, but I truly must accept it. Not just my powers, but also the responsibility I hold as well. I know that a lot of tests will come as well, but I also want to make sure that Jinho will be okay. Hence, I don't want the accident which will happen soon to occur, and to not give her any trauma. I don't want my sister to ever be traumatized by this. Though the thought of her becoming a hunter did linger in my mind a little bit. Should I let her be a hunter? No, no. At least not in this life. Maybe after I use a couple of reincarnation, I'll let her be. But as currently as it is right now, no. She'll be better off as just a normal person. That'd be way better. And most likely she's even now weak as a hunter, so it most likely be for the better as well. Eventually I decided to go outside for a walk, just get my thoughts out. It's been so long and I've collected a lot of shadows by that time. And I've been really free from time to time since there have not been a lot of dungeon breaks or any dungeons appearing lately. Though I can tell that this will change very soon, though I'm not quite sure. I decided to just keep my calm and composure, eventually just checking out how many shadows I've collected. As I can see, my current stats of shadows are around the ranges of 6 to 500, which is pretty good for stars right now, but I need to get into thousands at least, since I'll need a lot more soldiers. I've put a lot of points in my intelligence so I can basically store up a lot more shadows than I could previously, so it was very beneficial. Also, of course, I do check out the news. Eventually, realized that I actually left my phone for a really long time, and I've been checking out lately ever since I entered the demon's castle. Eventually, I decided to check out the news and see that the news that being Kaiso. I guess I was not very stealthy while utilizing him. Though granted, I did carry ASOL to my apartment, so I was not caring about much getting attention by it. So I guess that's that, but I think I can take care of it later. Though I then get reminded, oh, ASO. Oh, this is gonna be a big headache when mine Jiao introduced to her. Well, at least I can explain it a little better, but I'm not quite sure if it will work or not. God, this is gonna be such a headache, I can tell it. I sighed as I think to myself. Eventually, I get a call from someone. Eventually, I answered the phone. And eventually, I heard that it was Don He, the chairman of the Hunter Association. Of course, I'll be surprised. And the chairman was calling me. I'll be surprised and even shocked. Whoa, he actually called me? Honestly, it's been so long that I may have forgotten the plot for the entire novel, or even the manhwa itself, but I can still tell that this is pretty surprising to me. So I decided to hear him out, and eventually I wanted to visit him in the Hunter Association headquarters. Of course, he wouldn't decide to also tell me about the Jeju Island raid, which they believe that they want to go once again. Last resort, of course. And they actually and the tournament was actually for me to join the other hunters to help in the Jeju Island raid. Of course, I'll be quite surprised, but remain calm and composed. Of course, all civilians do wish for the recapture of the Jeju Island, and he eventually asked me if he can basically join this, for me to join this operation. Of course, I think to myself deeply. Honestly, I've been doing nothing but raiding dungeons and leveling up my entire life until now. I've been trying to get stronger ever since I was reborn to this world, and honestly, it's getting kind of tiring. I'm just tired. Not physically, but mentally. I just want a break. Yes, I do want to grow stronger, yes, but can I just take a break from time to time? I always linger this in my head from time to time, but I basically keep it in the back. Not wanting to bother with it much, since it will mostly distract me for too long. But this lingering thought did increase after Azel came up with me. I do want to basically take a break, probably even introduce Azel to my family, maybe even get along with them as well. I'm still not quite sure. I just want her to get along with everyone. At least my family for now. I want to get introduced to more humans as we go along, though I'm not quite sure. Maybe, though I already know my answer be, though I kind of not quite sure. As I'm about to answer it, I instantly feel an overwhelming amounts of magical energy. I was shocked as I felt it. I called the chairman and was like to chuckle, and told me that I have really good senses. And eventually told me that I'm detecting the S-rank hunters which were training from a distance. Of course, I'll be surprised. Eventually, he would have told me about the S-ranks basic training and warming up at the gym. Of course, I'll be surprised, and of course, he tells me if he wants to basically talk about it or even see. Of course, I'll nod calmly. And eventually, he will also told me about Goto Ryuji, the strongest hunter currently as well. Of course, I'll be surprised. The strongest S rank currently is here, huh? It's quite surprising. I do want to meet him in person. I've seen him many times, but seeing him in person would be pretty interesting, dude. So I had to agree to the chairman as we went to the training facility. Inside, we see two S-rank hunters battling with each other. As the clash between them would have immense shockwave. She can almost the entire building, but it's able to withstand shockwave out of two S-rank hunters. Very impressively as well. The German will explain that it's not uncommon for S-rank hunters to basically train and gather into one place. And the magical energy that I've sensed earlier is basically probably from them. I'll eventually glance at the two of them, and eventually I'll also see Troy. Of course, I'll be surprised that he's here. I didn't expect him to actually appear here. I was expecting him to maybe appear later, but he actually appeared way earlier than I expected. Interesting. And we should also glance at the two S-rank hunters. One of them being Modong Wook, the S-rank hunter and a master of the Fang Guild, and of course, Bake bound with each other. I can also tell that even Bake without his transformation, he's still pretty strong. I can tell that he's not utilizing the full transformation. He's only utilizing a slight amount of it, though not the full extent of it. I can tell. And of course, Troy would explain to me that that a lot of people have been gathering here. I eventually glance outside and see the Japanese hunters. Of course, Ippai Aizawa, Mari Ishida, Kenzo Tanaka, Minoru Hoshino, Atsushi Kumamoto, Kanye Tawata, Tatsumi Fujishima, Kei, Akari Shimizu, and of course, the famous, strongest current S-rank hunter, Goto Ryuji, the strongest S-rank of them all. Of course, I already know that that statement is false, since I am basically the strongest S-rank hunter, but nobody knows about it yet. Thus, I basically let those people think that Goto is still the strongest S-rank hunter. I also know about his intention. I also know his background as well. He's basically a hunter who wanted to basically have freedom for his country, and I do respect him. But the fact that he basically was corrupted so easily, it's a shame. But I can maybe fix that. Though, I guess I'll let time tell. Of course, I'll think to myself that he's very strong for an S rank. Very powerful as well. I can also tell of why people would even compare him to a national rank hunter. Even say that he's actually close to a national rank hunter's strength. Though I can tell that he's not there yet. Though he's always still pretty impressive, even more stronger than Chahayan. Though, in comparison to the national rank hunters, he's barely even a pebble in their eyes. I can tell that. Eventually, one of the S-rank hunters would eventually glance aside and eventually ask of who I am. Eventually, the translator girl, which will be accompanying them, would explain that I'm Hunter's son Jin-woo. They recently becoming S-rank hunter. Of course, they'll be surprised. And even, of course, Goto will be surprised, as he thinks that I'm actually an assassin class hunter, and that my enormous presence cannot be concealed despite my attempts. And he even says out loud that he's very splendid assassin class hunter. Of course, the translator girl eventually corrects Goto, saying that I'm a mage class hunter. Of course, Goto is surprised that I'm actually a mage class hunter, as he doesn't believe it. But the translator girl tells him that it's actually been officially confirmed by information. Of course, Goto does have his doubts, but he decides to lay off for now. Of course, one of the S-rank hunters eventually see who it is, and eventually even recognize me that I'm newly S-rank hunter, alongside the one who basically run Ming Song's deputy. Of course, Charlie will also glance at me. She'll be surprised and you wonder why I'm here. She'll also be surprised that the airs actually became way more comforting when I came here, like my own mana basically cleared all on the passing other manas as well. Of course, one of the hunters would eventually ask the other B. Of course, Ishida would eventually ask K, then to be pretty confused, eventually asking him if I'm the apparently 10th S-rank hunters. Of course, K would eventually told to not talk to him, since he would basically throw up due to his senses being overloaded by the amount of S-rank hunters that being here. Just like Chahayan, his senses of smell is very powerful. So, just like Chahayan, he needs to cover his nose or body to basically not be affected by it. Eventually, we move on back to a battle with Ma and Bake, as both of them would battle with each other. Of course, the Translator girl will not be that much surprised since she is witness of what Goto Ryuji can do. And of course, she'll be surprised as if that is so. And she's telling that she has seen how Goto Ryuji has cleared numerous gates from many times. So she is not that impressed. Of course, Goto Ryuji would eventually glance at Chaohan, saying that she is something else. Even though she's an S-rank hunter, he can tell that she's very strong, stronger than the other S-ranks. And of course, he eventually thinks to himself that they say that her name was Chaoyan. Of course, he will also decide to compare her to the chairman, Gon He, and he can tell of why they basically even compare it, since he can tell that she's a very strong S-rank hunter, even stronger than most an average S-rank hunters that he has seen before. So he is very impressed at how powerful she is. I also glance at him and eventually think to myself that it seems that there will be a spark between the two A-rank hunters. Since I can tell that the translator girl and of course one of the A-ranks which was offended by the statement of that the translator girl decided to fight against, so they decided to basically have a friendly spar. I was not expecting much, it was going to go either way. And of course, Troy will say that this is getting quite interesting, as I will calmly watch it. Eventually, the translator girl and the guy will be battling against each other, as they were able to dodge, as the guy was able to dodge all of her attacks, with her being actually quite surprised and even taken it back. Of course, he was able to grab her wrist and tell her to not underestimate an A-rank hunters of Korea, nor the S-ranks as well, since they're not to be underestimated. He also would have told her if he had a knife in his hand, he could have slit her throat or wrist. Of course, she just scoffs and gets her hand off his. Eventually, she decides she believes that the building is just enough to possibly make a completely good spar for Japanese and Korean hunters. And of course, she's able to also translate the words of Goto Ryuji, saying that he wants to spar between the Japanese and Korean S ranks, as he believes that it will be very beneficial to actually see how everyone is. Eventually, both me and the chairman would eventually decide to enter there. Of course, the chairman will actually be surprised at that, but not that much surprised to see that Goto wants to see and even check out the skills of the Korean S ranks, as I will calmly watch as well. Of course, Big decided to also add some extra rules that whoever can touch others' back or even knock them over will be considered the winner as well, since it'll be way more fun like that. Of course, when Goto Ryuji also hears this, he has to agree to those terms, believing that it will be very beneficial, and is okay with it. Eventually, from the side of the Korean S ranks, we got Bae Hon-ho, Hunter Ma, Hunter Cha-hayen, of course, Lim Tai-kyu will be participating on the Korean side. And on the other side will be Kenzo, Minoru, Atsushi, and of course Kanye on the Japanese side. As will be 4 S rank hunters against 4 S rank hunters. Of course, I'll think to myself that Gotoji really wants to stay back and observe the sidelining battles. In that case, you don't get to see an S rank hunters battle every day. It's a good thing that I came. I think to myself, I've seen them fight in pictures, but to see it with my actual eyes will be much more different, and I want to see it in action. Eventually, the battle will begin, as Ma will decide to rush in first, instantly as well, with Japanese and of course Korean hunters battling with each other, as both of them will smash an immense blow with each other, making a massive shockwave and a burst of light just with their own fists alone. Of course, anyone would have seen his opponent rush against him, but he can also tell that he's pretty confident in his speed, so that would be a lot more disadvantage to him. So he decides to make some distance and decide to attack from a long range. Of course, the Japanese will be surprised in even the magic arrows, but he's able to dodge. Of course, the German thinks to himself that this is very interesting, since most average hunter wouldn't be able to make a dent into those rooms. So the battle between those 4 S rank hunters will be pretty interesting. Of course, he also knows the other Korean hunters must not let the young ones be that prideful in the battle, since they will be quite regretful as well. Of course, Bacon rushes in to attack one of the Japanese hunters. Of course, as he gets outside, he sees one of them trying to attack him, but instantly he dodges. But he also can tell that he definitely felt a blood loss. So why didn't that guy back off of him? Confused, and of course, Japanese hunter sighs in relief, saying that he got nervous again, and he thinks that he's really not cut out to be a hunter. Of course, Big will be confused and even think he's not quite sure of if he's a wimp or not, but he does not look that much aggressive. Of course, he'll teach himself back to his conversation with his best friend, but that could be a mistake from his end, so he decides not to bother with it much. Eventually, he decides to attack the Japanese hunter and saying that it's a real shame for him to awaken as a hunter, saying and also be one of the top S rank hunters as well, saying that it would be very shameful as well. Of course, he's able to dodge, but he also glances aside as he sees a battle, as Ma has actually lost. Of course, the Japanese hunter says that it is a win, and commends Ma for his strength. Of course, Ma just laughs and is still in disbelief of getting slammed to the ground this much, and even surprised as well. Eventually, Lim also loses as well, as the victory goes to the Japanese side, being 2-0. Of course, Big just sighs in annoyance. This is really getting out of hand, and they're really getting pushed down as well. But Big just sighs and says, "Who's next? You guys think that you can face me easier than facing Chaein? You're really looking down on me," he says, clearly getting ready to fight with all out. Not the way to transform just yet, but willing to give it his all. While back in the fight, we see Kanye and of course Chaein battle with each other, both of them utilizing flow movement. But of course, Kanye is actually surprised at how powerful Chaein is. And when Chaein is able to basically blitz her with a powerful attack, able to distract her. Shocking Kanye is Chaein is able to touch her back, instantly giving her the victory. Of course, Kanye would be surprised, but also be very impressed by Chaeyn's movements. It's still incredibly fluent and almost like a dance. She's very impressed by the S-rank hunter. Of course, she also glances at Big and sees that he's actually in trouble since he's fighting 2 S-rank hunters at the same time. So she wants to help him in that battle to make things much more fair. But of course, one of the Japanese hunters tries to basically strike her when her guard is down. But as he does that, she instantly punches him in the face with a massive shockwave crossing with each punch, as her fists are almost blind to her normal eyes, as her tries to almost sound like a gunshot. When of course she easily realizes and realizes that she actually went a little overboard, since this is basically a natural reaction she always has. So she has always been around dungeons, so she has basically had the instinct of basically fighting almost instantaneously. But instantly, the Japanese hunter's eyes begin to glow red, with malice and even bloodlust being emanated from him, seemingly as he was actually going berserk. Of course, the Japanese hunter will also see it, and also remember how they remember actually acts way different, like his personality. His personality basically switches when he goes all out, like going berserk. He basically is able to clear a lot of dungeons, and being able to clear even B rank dungeons with ease on his own as well. Though he doesn't basically subjugate an A rank gates much more often, even though he is basically awakened as an S rank hunter. Of course, he tries to attack Chakayan, but before that blow connect, a massive shockwave occurs as I instantly appear, and I say, "Hope you don't mind me stepping in," as I will block his kick. I also was able to protect Chakayan as I glance at him, saying that he kind of went overboard, though I did expect much less. I'm eventually able to subdue him by slamming him to the ground, as he was able to regain his senses, being confused and also shocked, but I remained calm and composed, knowing that he most likely would do the same. Of course, Goto will also be impressed by my skills and even power that I've actually shown. He definitely believes that I'm no ordinary mage class hunter, even if as an S rank hunter, no mage class hunter, even an S rank could not even possess this type of power and speed. An S rank hunter, he will most likely believe it, but an S rank, he doubts it. So he wants to test me. Eventually, I'll ask if Chakayan is okay, and so we're to go back to the rest of the hunters, since they kind of lost this competition on the Korean side. Of course, Chakayan nods and appreciates my help. Of course, Bake also sighs and realizes that he is indeed lost. And even if he were to transform, he most likely will not able to make a dent in this battle, nor make a slight difference as well. But that's his own thoughts for now. Eventually glance and lets it go to Ryuji, and eventually the translator girl would eventually say that go to Ryuji basically has a message for me, for her to tell me. Of course, I eventually decided to agree, and eventually go to Ryuji asks if I'm son Jinwoo. Of course, we'll not, and eventually get serious. I know what's coming, and I'm ready. Eventually, I also can tell that the orders he's giving off, and I can tell what he wants, even without the translator. He wants to battle and see what I'm capable of. Well, it will not be that easy. I've been growing stronger, I can already tell. Though the difference between when I was fighting Baron and now, I can tell that I'm mostly able to take on Baron with ease. I'm mostly be an equal to him. Back then, I was barely an equal. I mostly was looking because of ASO. But if I were to fight him again with my current level and strength, I'm most likely able to beat him. So I can tell that Goto Ryuji is most likely a much lower level than even Baron, though his strength is still pretty impressive nonetheless. But I can already tell that he's also trying to achieve something else, something that I still don't know, but I had to let it be. But it's not a bad chance for me to check out how much stronger I've become since the Demon's Castle. Though I can tell that I've become stronger than ever, I want to see how far I've come as well. Of course, Goto is surprised as he sees me smiling, thinking that I'm mocking him. Eventually, I eventually will tell the translate girl, and she was able to translate to Goto that I accept his challenge. However, I have one condition. Of course, Goto asks what it is, and she tells him that I want him and utilizing his full strength, instantly irritating the Japanese S-rank hunter, easily getting him irritated. But he has to agree, and says that that's fine by him since they have an S-rank healer beside them. So I don't have to worry much. Of course, Ma will sit down and eventually saying that, so I'm the famous 10th S rank. This is very impressive, and he says that I'm quite strong, and he still can't believe that he's fine with Goto Ryuji. Of course, China will be surprised that everyone's actually okay with this, but she also can tell. But she can also tell that with me being able to easily clear higher rank dungeons and even defeat its boss in multiple high orcs, She believes that maybe I'll be able to stand a chance, but she's not quite sure. Of course, Big tells her if she's doing alright despite the round the round being for the rest of the hunters. Of course, trying to tell this is fine, but it's not like she don't like to actually cover her nose a lot since they'll be going to a Jeju Iron raid, and she needs to get prepared. But she also wonders if they'll also be accompanying them. And of course, Bake also agrees. Of course, she wonders if they should not start the match, but Bake thinks that they should not want to see how strong I truly am. And of course, eventually we turn back to me. And eventually I'll say, alright, I say then, alright, let's get started. But before I can finish my sentence, I see a hand instantly flying at me. But I easily able to dodge as a massive blow occurred from Goto, but I was able to dodge the attack. I also think to myself, he attacked before I finished talking? Well, that's kind of rude. Well, nah, I didn't expect much less. Of course, Goto thinks to himself that he thinks if he missed. But he thinks to himself, they really telling that I'm a mage hunter? Now that's some bullshit. Is he does not believe it in the less. Of course, I can also tell that he's very different from normal S-rank hunters. Definitely extremely strong, though nothing in comparison to our natural rank hunters. Though I give him credit, he's pretty strong. Though with my current levels of strength, not that much. I'm actually able to dodge one more attack, and I can smile and I smile to myself. Seeing as I can already avoid most of his movement, I'm glad that I basically spent some of my points to ascend, since it will be very beneficial, and my ascent is actually way higher than Jin was in the original, and I'm very glad about it, since I will need it in the future as well. Of course, Goto is irritated to see me smiling once again, and eventually he starts getting more serious, while the rest of the hunters will be pretty surprised that this match is not stopping. And of course, one of those seems to think that Goto has something serious about this match, though they're not quite sure. Even the other S-ranks were actually quite surprised that I'm able to basically dodge Goto's attacks, even be pretty impressed. Of course, Mai's also been pretty impressed and thinks that the balls are very strong. Even from one of the best hunters of Korea, it will be very hard to even dodge many of them. Of course, trying these that I'm still holding back. And not just, I'm not holding on, but instead I'm holding back even testing Goto, not him testing me. She's very confident in that. Of course, Troy will also see in the battle which was going on, and thinks that it was very good that he did not went for smoke at this time. Very impressed. Of course, Goto tries to strike at me once again, but I dodged once again, with him being surprised and thinking if that was luck. But he has had to change his mind, seemingly as he will need to utilize his full strength to at least put a dent in this battle. So he decided that he should kill me. But I already know what he was thinking, even before he can tell. But the way for us to just confirm my thoughts. He was releasing his bloodlust. He did try to kill me. I get irritated and eventually, as Goto tries to strike once again, a massive shock will occur. With, of course, Goto being shocked and his eyes widen in shock. It's like grabbing his hand, gripping it tightly. And I say, if I was any slower, then I would have lost my right eye right there. And I tell him that it's very not nice for trying to kill someone, you know? But I already said I might think to myself in my mind. He's getting clearly on my nerves, and he's giving me more of a reason to kill him right here and now. But, no, I'll let the Ant King deal with him. It'll be much more beneficial for me, since I don't have to waste my breath on this trash right now. Of course, Goto gets irritated, and he thinks that I'm playing around. Of course, I tell him that I'm not sure what you're saying right now, but the match is over if I grab your wrist, right? Even if you win and our match this way, right? I say, smiling as my eyes begin to glow with my power increasing. Of course, both me and Goto will instantly rush at each other, releasing massive amounts of our magical energy as we begin to rush at each other. As my mom begins to cover me, I instantly rush with him at speed. As Goto will do the same. But before we can clash, I instantly be stopped by both Bake and Chocolate in just a nick of time. Of course, I'll be quite surprised as I realize that I actually went overboard. Of course, Gojo eventually restrained from one of his subordinates, and eventually our ice was built between us, as a massive shockwave from our pressures alone was enough to shatter slightly it, so it wasn't needed so it cannot make any lasting damage. Of course, Big tells me to stop the match, saying that Goto will be very needed for alongside me and the raid which will occur in a few days. Of course, everyone told me mm, that will not be able to take responsibility if Goto gets hurt. Of course, we'll side eventually. Big would tell the transgender girl to basically plan a match to end, being as a draw. Of course, she has to agree to it, and eventually the match ends. And Goto eventually asks if he was intervening when he shouldn't. I told him that it's fine, and I think to myself that I went quite overboard. Though I don't blame myself. Eventually, my would decide to approach me and say that I have quite a strong physique, and he thinks to myself that his guild is very full of magical users, and they're basically lacking on some high physical fighters, and asked me if I don't want to join his guild. But of course, Chor would eventually decide to interrupt my eventually telling that I'm a mage type hunter. Of course, Maui incredibly shocked and surprised. I also sighed and think to myself, man, I actually went a little overboard, and I was trying to actually hold back at that time. I guess I really should keep my instincts at bay. I'm only getting ahead of myself a little bit. Though I guess it makes sense, I've grown stronger, so I guess it makes sense I get a little cocky from time to time. But I already know my strength in comparison to all the other S-rank hunters. But also, I was able to basically send some of my shadows when I was in contact with them, alongside Goto as well. Eventually, the chairman would eventually ask for me, and I eventually told him, Chairman, you asked me about whenever or not I will participate in the Jeju Island raid, correct? Of course, the chairman nods, and eventually I would decide to tell him my answer, or of course, with the chairman being shocked as he heard my answer. While on the other side, the Chancellor would eventually ask Goto if he was okay, but Goto was sweating bullets. He could not believe it. The awe he felt from me was so intense, so powerful, and so frightening at the same time. He's shocked. Am I really just a normal S-rank hunter? It can't be, right? He doesn't believe it. While, a couple hours later, at the White Towers Guild, Big would think to myself that I'm constantly getting stronger than ever, and he wonders how much worse will I truly be. I've always decided to basically get a call, and eventually decided to pick up. And eventually seeing that there's actually a participation list for the ant raid in 4 days. But as it looks like he's in shock. As it is now actually not in the list. Why? Why is it not in the list? Well, back at another place, there'll be an apartment with Goto Ryuji being there. And we're talking with someone's named Sugomo, saying that he met a talented S-rank hunter in Korea. Of course, this Sukumoto fella is an S-rank hunter and is the vice master of Goto's draw sword, the guild. And saying that he's very impressed to actually see that I was actually able to trade blows with the famous Goto Ryuji. Of course, Goto is also not sure about it, and eventually, Sukumoto eventually decides to ask him what my name is, and eventually he will tell me that my name is Jin-woo. Of course, he'll also be surprised that my name is actually isn't on the list. But of course, this being quite surprised for Goto. Eventually, Sukumoto would actually tell him that the German seems to not want to basically me participating, or I'm most likely not participating there on my own volition. Of course, he thinks that it would be more that since there are 16 S-rank hunters didn't participate in the raid, it will not be that big of a deal. Even if we miss one S-rank, so it will not be that much big of a deal. While back at the island, we see in Hamas being Kwangdam inside the nest of the ants, some of the ants will be starting to eat each other. Eventually, we heard a voice saying that there is nothing left to eat, and the children are eating each other, and there's no more food to support our empire. That being the voice of the Ant Queen, the current Ant Queen for now. And she says that this cannot continue to stay like this. And when she glanced at one of the eggs that she laid a long time ago, being infused with immense mana as a new ant was being born. Eventually, she said that she needs that this new empire needs an ultimate soldier to lead it, not just one but two. Eventually, Dig begins to glow with immense mana as the figure inside begins to grow in immense rate. And eventually, she said that to the end that it must become stronger than anyone else, and eventually it begins to burst from its egg, and eventually letting out a massive screech as it unleashes an overwhelming magical power from its body, shaking the entire island. Eventually, the Ant Queen will also glance outside, seeing another glowing egg, and she thinks to herself, when the time comes, a new Ant Queen will be born. This time, she'll be even more powerful than herself, powerful enough to annihilate any human which comes in their way. As a new Ant King and Ant Queen will be born on this day. And she cannot wait to see how these humans will quake in the might of the new empire of the ants, of their new king and queen. As a massive burst of energy occurred from the newly born ant, shaking the island immensely. But this is the end for now, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao!